In my last video, I started working on a new project with the goal to recreate all of the Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach Ruin DLC in Minecraft. Even though I've already built the Pizzaplex from the base game, there were so many changes made for Ruin's gameplay which stopped me from reusing that build to make the changes needed for this new project. Because of this, I decided that the best thing to do was to build a second Pizzaplex from the very beginning. So in part 1 of this series, I built the main entrance lobby as well as the atrium kitchen and the utility tunnel under it, which will make up the intro levels to the game. And now continuing from where we left off, we're now going to be taking a look at the entirety of the Superstar Daycare and see how we can recreate it in its ruined form. From an overhead view, we can see just how much there is going on inside of the daycare area, as not only are the play structures almost completely destroyed, but the amount of damage blocks up most of the room, and now there's only one path open to get through to the generators. We're also going to be building the Fazbear Theater as well as the daycare attendance room and the storage room between the daycare and Monty Golf, since all are a part of the daycare chapter. Not only that, but the daycare is the first part in this project that includes the AR world, since we're able to use the Vanny mask at this point in the game. So I am going to be building the AR world in this video, but we'll touch on that later since it's just a copy of the daycare with a few added glitching props. But now that we know what we're ready to work on, I've spent a few days building the daycare outlines to give me the basic instructions on how to build it in Minecraft. Like always, outlines are extremely helpful for big builds like this, and I couldn't see myself working on a project without them. While pretty much everything has been marked down, there are still a few areas that you'll notice are empty or missing, like the entrance to the daycare and all of the different party rooms. And that's because none of these are actually shown or modeled in Ruin, since the player isn't supposed to get to those areas. Now I could use this as an excuse to use my imagination for what these rooms would look like, but for the time being, I'm only going to be building what's seen in Ruin. I also haven't outlined the play structures, but I thought there would be no point in doing so since they're so small and compact. However, I'm still going to make sure that the player can walk through them, all while they lead us to the right place. But that's everything needed for the pre-build planning of this area, meaning the next thing to do is to get started working on the build itself. You might be surprised to see me build the daycare before Monty Golf, since the daycare section takes place in Chapter 2 after leaving Monty Golf in Chapter 1. But the main reason I did this is because the daycare is the closest area to the main lobby, so it made the most sense for me to do this next, instead of jumping to an area further away. It's also a lot more convenient for me since the ruined Pizzaplex only has one way to get to the next attraction, which then lets me build in an anti-clockwise order all the way to the opposite side of the Pizzaplex. Now speaking of connecting areas, you probably noticed the outline for the hallway that connects the lobby to the daycare, even though we're never able to go there in Ruin. That outline was actually taken from my unused Pizzaplex outlines I talked about in part 1, and even though it won't be a part of this build, I still used it to give me an idea of where the daycare should be in relation to the lobby. I keep mentioning it, but Ruin has changed the Pizzaplex in a lot of weird ways, but I can only assume that the lobby still leads to the daycare in the same way as in Security Breach. From there, however, everything from Ruin has been marked down using different colored concrete to let me know what type of build needs to go where. Grey and brown blocks usually mean that there's dirt, trash or rubble, while other colors are the actual colors of the different decorations, like blue concrete for a blue arcade machine, or black and red concrete for tables and chairs with the same color. This might seem unnecessary, but I look back at how I used to do my outlines and realize why it was so easy for me to miss out on something, especially since I just made the general shape for a build and never marked down where the props needed to go. This is my second time building the Pizzaplex, so now that I already have a lot of practice with it, I'm able to start work on a new area with a bit more experience than I did for the last one. So even if this build is still a massive undertaking, it's still a lot of fun to grow as a builder and learn new ways to prepare for a big build like this. It's why anytime you see me working on a project, whether in Minecraft or anything else, I always start with a frame to work from. But as I continue building, I might just find new ways to do this that could end up being even more helpful. And even though I've built these detailed outlines, they're not going to show what the completed build is going to look like, as some changes are going to be made while building. This is usually more common in the smaller rooms like the daycare gift shop, as even though I plan out where everything needs to go before I start building, I don't actually design what the build is going to look like. So if two decorations end up sharing the same block, I have to decide which one gets the most detail, which usually turns out to be the bigger of the two. Now obviously you don't want to get rid of one of those objects completely, so sometimes just moving the prop by a single block from where it's supposed to be can help fix this issue as well. Moving away from the smaller details, let's take a look at the bigger picture for a moment with the main structure of the daycare. Surprisingly, the main walls of the daycare are pretty clean compared to the rest of the room, which is why you didn't see me adding in a mix of concrete powder to add some dirty looks to the overall build. There's still some examples of ruin around the rest of the build, like ceiling lights being loose or a support beam falling down, but aside from that, the damage isn't as bad as some of the other attractions. My best guess as to why is because Ruin's setting is way too dark to let us see the walls of the daycare, so there wouldn't be a point in adding in those details that won't be seen. Right now we're able to see everything because I have a night vision effect enabled, but I do plan on going back over the entire build once everything is finished, that way I can add in some proper lighting to the place, as right now it's obviously much brighter than it should be. Now I've gone on about how important preparing for a Minecraft build is, even though I didn't plan out for the place structures, which is probably the most important and complicated thing in the daycare. So much so that I struggled a lot in my old map and even this new one, trying to find the right balance of what looked good and what actually functioned like a place structure that let us walk through them. In my original map, I could get away with making them not entirely as they should be, not just because I was limited with the space I had to work with, but because the placement of the generators didn't really matter as much back then. Fast forward to Ruin, however, and now I have to be a lot more specific since the place structures are supposed to lead to set areas which follow a linear path to progress through the game. Just by paying attention to the placement of barriers and props around the daycare, it's really obvious as to how linear this game is. However, the base game had a lot of linear moments as well, but it's a lot different in this game as now there's going to be some points where you have to use the Vanny mask to keep on going. The place structures, and to a bigger extent the whole Pizzaplex, is full of glitching objects which forces you to go to the AR world to pass through them. So while I'm building, I need to remember that not everything is accessible anymore, and there might be some places where I'll need to use a Minecraft version of the mask to go to a new area. And I've already seen a lot of comments wondering how I'm going to make the AR mask mechanic and how complicated it could be, but if I have to be honest, I've already designed a working version of it in a test world before I even started working on this project. Now it's not completely finished as I haven't added in all of the features, like the restrictions that stop you from using it occasionally, but it still works in the same way as it does in Ruin. We saw earlier how there's always 2 daycares rendered in Ruin, and we're going to be using that same technique for this project by having a copy of the build underneath this one. Before we can get to that though, there's still a lot of building we need to do, which is why I need to finish this build before I can start the next one. Either way, I'm still looking forward to seeing how it's all going to turn out. 11.5 hours later, and the main daycare room is fully finished. Now there's not too much going on around the outside of the play area, but as you look towards the center of the room, that's where everything starts to come together to form the mess that's going on in here. You're probably wondering about the play structures and what it's like to walk around them, so we'll go ahead and check that out first. Now, I'll have to use spectator mode to go through some of these tunnels like this, since Minecraft won't allow us to do some of the things that we can do in Ruin. But besides the fact that it's impossible to recreate these place structures one-to-one in Minecraft, I still think this gets the point across of going through these narrow walkways and making our way up to the different floors. Each place structure took around an hour to build as there's a lot of detail going on in each one, and I also wanted to recreate a similar path as in Ruin, even with the limits I had. There might also be a few times where we need to use the mask to go through a wall, but we're still able to find the generator at the very top. The netting was another interesting part to build, as in my first Pizzaplex, I didn't add any until near the end of the project. But by mixing fences and fence gates, you're able to see through the small gaps in the block, while also making it look like the netting is all connected. Now if this room was square shaped, it would have been a lot easier to build, but the net curves in a lot of these corners and even from the 2 sides, where you can see it makes its way outward before then curving back in. Overall though, I'm still happy with the way it looks, even with all the holes I had to punch into it to make it look like it's tearing away. Let's now move on to the Fazbear Theater, which should be a lot easier to build than the daycare, but there's still quite a lot going on in here as we can see by all the different outlines. This is another area in Ruin that had some rooms cut from it, so the daycare basement and the small snack bar won't be included since they're not areas that we can get to. But once we finish building the theater, we're then going to finish the build by adding the storage room that connects back to Monty Golf. So let's get into another time lapse and fully complete the daycare. Instead of talking about the Minecraft build, I want to take this time to go over the in-game Pizzaplex, as the daycare theater is one of the parts in the game where connectivity between 2 areas starts to get really weird. After you've rebooted the daycare attendant, you're then told to go to the theater because there's a way to reach the Monty Golf catwalks from there. Now if you've looked at a map of the Pizzaplex or even watched my building series, you'll know that there isn't a way that those 2 areas connect together. It's not even a case of there being a cut area from Security Breach that was added in for Ruin, as the only cut daycare hallway is in the basement where the endoskeletons used to be. I noticed this during my first playthrough, but back then I had the thought that it might just be a completely new hallway that somehow went from underneath the daycare all the way up to the catwalks. Now that the game's been out for a while, we know this isn't the case, as if we go out of bounds we can see that Cassie is instead teleported from inside the mouth of the giant endoskeleton up into a random vent above the gondola ride in Monty Golf. Keep in mind that the catwalks are on a completely different floor above the daycare, so it's impossible to have fallen down into an area that's supposed to be higher up from where you dropped from. Now I know I keep saying that Ruin's Pizzaplex is different than the original, but at least there's a few areas where the changes could make sense in some way, no matter how small of a reason it might be. The change to make the elevators from Security Breach into actual elevators can make sense, even if they were fake in the base game, and could have been replaced by a hallway that connected to attractions that are already on the same floor. Another example I'll use is the basement door in Bonnie Bowl that used to lead to the office in Phasablast. Even though they used to lead to each other in the base game, you could still get away with the change since technically you're not supposed to go through the door. But just having the player teleport from one side of the Pizzaplex to another is so confusing to me. Don't get me wrong, the sequence was completely unexpected and really cool, but I'm someone who really enjoyed figuring out how the Pizzaplex worked in a realistic way. To see this happen in Ruin was really annoying since the Pizzaplex is such an interesting build that will always lead to an important area no matter what back hallway you go through. Now this isn't a big deal for me, as at the end of the day I'll most likely just set up a teleport command that takes the player from the theater up to Monty Golf. But since I'm trying to put a physical build together, I can't help but notice things like this. This ended up turning into a little bit of a rant, but I really wanted to talk about this, as one of my favorite parts of the Security Breach Pizzaplex is how everything naturally connected to each other using those staff hallways. However, this leads me to my next topic, and that's about the hallway that goes from Monty Golf to the daycare. This went through a big change in Security Breach, as there's actually a different looking hallway that connected the same door in Monty Golf to the same TV screen we jumped through in Ruin. However, that hall was never used in Security Breach, despite the fact it's modeled and still accessible if you clip through the wall. Now, ignoring the fact that the updated hallway wouldn't be able to fit in the base game's map, it's still pretty cool to see new areas like this, even if they're not entire attractions like what we see with the log ride behind the beauty salon. Thinking about it, Ruin does a great job at taking areas in Security Breach which weren't really important, and then turning them into places of full chapters worth of gameplay. The daycare theater, the bakery, and most of the beauty salon all felt like filler for the base game, but each are very important in Ruin by getting the player from one side of the building to another. At the same time, each one is expanded upon to include so much more that we weren't able to see in Security Breach. It's details like this that really make me enjoy playing the game over and over, even if it can annoy me while I'm rebuilding it in Minecraft. But now going back to a Minecraft related topic, I thought it might be fun to bring up some other Security Breach mechanics that I've recreated alongside the Vanny Mask. So as of now, my favorite of the three is a working staff bot that follows a set path and then catches the player if you get too close to it. Now it doesn't summon a Glamrock animatronic to chase the player, but everything else works in the same way as an actual staff bot would. I've also managed to get a Glamrock endoskeleton to work like a weeping angel, and then more recently I've made a pretty basic Glamrock Freddy that you can use to get away from hostile mobs. These are all tests that can definitely be improved upon, but I just wanted to play around with the idea of how I could do it, as a playable Security Breach experience in Minecraft is still a project that I plan on doing once I find the right time for it. So before I get to that, there's still a few projects I need to do first, such as finishing Ruin, which is my current priority, and then Help Wanted 2, which is releasing later this year. Once I've completed both, I'd then like to try building different FNAF fan games to get me more prepared for different types of game mechanics. Ever since I've recreated Princess Quest for my Pizzaplex last year, recreating gameplay from other games in Minecraft form has become one of my favorite things to do, so I'm always going to be adding some in my projects whenever I get the chance to. This project obviously has the Vanny Mask, but I'm also thinking that I might add the two playable arcade machines for Monty Golf and Chica's Feeding Frenzy, like how I added the original Security Breach minigames in my first Pizzaplex map. I suppose I could also add the Faz Wrench and every door lock, but I would definitely need to finish the entire build first, since I need every door to work with. To add on to that, the security nodes could also be a fun minigame to play while exploring, but at that point I feel like I might as well just remake the entire gameplay of Ruin. That would also need a Mexa system and the actual Glamrock animatronics, which would most likely need their own AI to walk around with. These are all things I'll still mess around with in my own time, but I still think it would be fun to add some into this world and maybe make a video or two dedicated to them. We'll just have to wait and see where this project goes from here. With another 7-ish hours of building later, every part of the daycare is now completed, bringing the total build time to 18 hours and 13 minutes. This makes the build 4 hours longer than the lobby for part 1, however a lot more went into this part of the build since almost every room is filled with trash and other decorations. The storage room is an exception to this as it's relatively clean compared to the main locations, but it's still a completely different tone of building compared to the rest of the daycare, as instead of bright colors, most of the room is a muted grey, which is only broken up by the posters on the wall. But it's always really satisfying being able to walk around a build you've just finished, especially if you're recreating a game like I am, where it feels really weird looking around knowing that you're in another game's world, but playing it in a completely different one. However, we are not quite done just yet, as the final thing to do is to take this build and turn it into the glitching version that we see in the AR dimension. So to do this, I've made a copy of everything that we've just built and pasted it exactly 50 blocks under the top one. This shouldn't take too long to build, but there's still a lot of interesting things to go over. While the overall shape of the daycare is the same in both dimensions, the main difference between the two is that the color scheme turns things purple and black. Now, not everything is affected by this, but a lot of new details start to appear the longer you look at it. There's the obvious examples like floating clouds above the play area, but if you look carefully, there's even smaller details like holographic replacements for some damaged objects. The other important change made in the AR world is now we're actually able to walk through some barriers that were originally blocked in the normal world. In this build, only a few barriers needed to be removed since the daycare is still pretty early on in the game, so changes aren't going to be as complicated as they will be later on with some bigger attractions. Then of course is the giant endoskeleton in the Fazbear Theater. Organic builds like this have always been a little challenging for me, but I definitely want to get better at it as it's still something I enjoy building. Either way, I'm still proud of the way it turned out, and I still think it makes a great addition to the build. Overall, I still think that the AR world is a nice contrast between the normal one, as all of the colors and lighting make it stand out a lot more, especially with all the new features to look at. There's a whole lot more of it coming in the future, and this is really just the start of it. But that now wraps up everything for the AR world, meaning we now need to make the way for us to actually travel between the two builds by using the Vanny mask. So let's see how we can get this to work by using some command blocks. For our mask, we're going to be using this custom player head to take us between the two dimensions. So the first thing we need is to set up a command block to detect whenever we have it on or off. This can be easily done by using this execute command, which is looking for when the nearest player has an item on their head with a player head tag. So now whenever we wear the mask, this command block is going to send an output, which we can now connect to a teleport command. Since the lower build is 50 blocks under the main one, this command is now going to teleport us exactly 50 blocks under our current coordinate. The other two squiggly lines are just there to make sure we don't teleport in any other direction, and it's only going to change the Y level of where we're standing. However, we also want to teleport back up when the mask is taken off, so this third command block is going to do the same thing, but teleports us up instead of down. And believe it or not, that's the entire system fully finished. I'm not going to add any other restrictions just yet, as that would need some proper gameplay added for that to work properly. So now back in the daycare, if we reach an area that we can't normally walk through, we can just put this player head on and get taken to the build below us. Now we can continue on walking and then take the mask off to go back to the normal world. With that, however, we have now completed everything for part 2 of this project. Not only has the entire daycare been added, but also the Vanny mask to take us to the AR dimension. It was a lot of work and a lot of planning, but it was definitely worth the time spent, and I couldn't be happier with the ending result. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, that is now going to wrap it up for today's video. I really do hope that you enjoyed it and maybe learned a few building tips as well. If you're interested in future parts of this series, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe with notifications turned on. That way you know next time I upload, while also helping the channel to continue to grow. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I will of course see you in my next video.